What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Talkin' Pop podcast. Brad, we are here to discuss Baz Luhrmann's Elvis.
Are we ever, buddy?
Yes, the brand new biopic that was just released in theaters this past weekend.
Yeah.
It's kind of your typical sort of reaction where the critics don't like it as much. It's got a 79% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and then a 94% audience score, which is kind of like par for the course.
Do you know what's interesting to me? I'll not to like get into this right away. I kind of disagree. I think usually it's more or less the other way around. I usually find that it's like, these, I don't want to call it an art house film or like an artsier film, but it's not a Marvel movie or something. It's like generally the critics go nuts for stuff like that. And then the audience is like, they have general feelings on it. Some people love them, some people don't, some people whatever. So this time I thought it was interesting that it was almost the other way around, where it was like the critics are kind of, everybody generally liked it, I think, but the critics seemed like some really loved it, some were just kind of like good to meh, and then the audience really responded to this. And right. I think the numbers prove out this weekend that did very well at the box office.
Yes, it did. Okay, so let's get into it. Yep. About 30 seconds into this movie, there is no mistaking who is directing this.
No, yeah, agreed.
Yes. Like it's very yes. But Baz Luhrmann is the type of director where it's like, I don't want to say he's an acquired taste. Like, I'll just like full disclosure.
No, but I think that's a fair take.
I don't love Baz Luhrmann. Like, I don't love a lot of his movies. Okay. And it's not because of the style. Yeah. I actually like his like bright, vibrant style. I think it's really interesting. Yeah. And I think it worked more in this. It made it less of sort of a bland biopic and more like visually interesting and stimulating. Yeah. Yeah. However, he makes some creative choices in his movies that I don't always love. Like I'll get into it in a second, but I want to throw it to you and just get your take on like Baz Luhrmann in general and like his sort of artistic style as a director.
Yeah, like listen, I'm always for some of these directors that have like what you said. So it's like when you start watching a Baz Luhrmann movie, you know what you're watching, and you could make a very similar point to. Like a Tim Burton. As soon as a Tim Burton movie starts, you know what you're watching. You know what you're like. You know who it is. Martin Scorsese. There's a lot of them that just have like a very specific style that they will at times blend out and like do some other things. You can even make that argument honestly for Spielberg. Like I feel like a lot of times stylistically, I can tell when I'm watching a Spielberg movie, even though he jumps all over the place in genres and everything. But yeah, Baz Luhrmann, I think it's fair to say he can be an acquired taste at times for everybody. And I think that is what also makes him interesting because he's not afraid to, present his vision and not feel like he has to necessarily, hat in hand to everybody about, what it is he's trying to do. I think that's awesome. I think it's also interesting when you start to find out about like all the little things that were going on behind the scenes, like the time and effort that went into not only the movie itself, but just casting Elvis. Like when you hear about all the stuff that went on, like Austin Butler was essentially cast, but not really cast for like 2 or 3 months or something. And it was like, can you imagine the pressure? But anyways, all that aside, the movie itself, I loved. I thought it was very, like you said, Baz Luhrmann, and I thought that this was maybe his like crescendo moment as a filmmaker because he's been around for a little while. I think that's fair to say. Like he's done a lot of things I've liked, but this was very like, whoa, yes, this is a really interesting way to film a biopic.
Yes,
and let me say,
it worked for me.
It very much worked for me, and I think. More than anything, because I've actually made this point to a lot of people over the years that I love a good biopic about someone that, obviously is grandiose as Elvis or whatever. I love a good biopic, but sometimes biopics, when they become about like the entirety of their life and career, can be just like borderline mind numbing because it's just too much. It's just too much to fill in. And I usually like when they pick a very specific period of time, like a big, like if they had just decided to go with Elvis's special, like in that whole arc, I would have liked it and whatever. But this is probably the first time where I've actually seen a biopic where it did span the entirety of somebody's life and went, damn, like I really enjoyed this. Like I walked out feeling good.
Yeah, they did skip over
there was
some stuff.
Of course, they have to.
Yeah. Like the Priscilla love story was kind of just there. It was like she just showed up and they're in love and they have a baby, and like they didn't dive deep into that.
No, it was just again. I didn't think. But that's my problem usually with those.
You got to make sacrifices. Yeah. So one thing, can I just air one grievance about Baz Luhrmann?
Okay, go for it.
I hated in Gatsby. The music of these eras that these films are shot in is so timeless. Yet, why am I hearing modern day artists in these sort of like period pieces? And he started doing that in this movie. Like there were in the first act specifically, like it just plays some classic tunes from that era. People love that era. I love the way people are dressed. I love the way everything looks. Like it looks so good. And I'm hearing sort of like modern hip hop music.
Right.
It just seems out of place to me. And he did that. He only did it in the first act here. So I'll give him credit. He got away from it in the second and third act, and he didn't do it. He did it all through Gatsby, and it drove me nuts. But it's just not a choice that I personally like. It takes me out of the time period.
Okay.
To hear modern music.
And especially I get that.
You have a treasure trove of music from that era, that you can choose from.
And I think the one thing I'll say, and because I'm not totally disagreeing with you, because I do think that there's movies that have like the time and placement for things like that. Like one of the ones that I always seem to circle back to whenever I'm talking about movies that do that is A Knight's Tale. For anybody that doesn't remember Heath Ledger back in the day. Classic. But it was it was one of those things, right, where it was supposed to be like the knights were the rock stars of their day, and they were trying to get over this kind of youthful, interesting, rock star kind of feeling of those knights. So that's why you had like Bowie music and you had blah blah. I won't go through everything, but there was a lot of modern day music because again, if you had like a bunch of guys in silk scarves playing a flute, like it doesn't really carry much weight. And so I think with this as well, I think it was where it was done in this for me was done strategically in a way that I really liked because it was in the first act, because that whole thing was trying to get across like that young cool, and to get across that young cool for that younger, more modern audience, he's trying to say like, listen, this guy was cool as shit. Like you see him like in the scene where he like gets out of the Cadillac and he's like walking down the street and he's like, going to these speakeasies and things like that. And it's like the new take on Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog and things like that. Like I was here for it. I loved it. But then it like, as the movie went on, like you're right, it did slowly kind of blend out and it just kind of focused on his music.
Yes.
But I think it was more just trying to get across the fact of like that very young Elvis was so cool.
Yeah.
And how much of an impact that cool had on modern audiences at that time. So anyways, like I said, I think you're right. I think there's times where it bothers me, but in this instance, it didn't.
It's not that it bothers me. It's just like
it takes you out of it a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm a huge music fan.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm a huge believer that always go with the classics. Someone's gonna listen to this and call me grandpa, but it's like I'm a huge believer. Like always go with the classics over the modern stuff, man. That classic music is just so timeless.
Well, even if you want to like stick on this for a minute, like I mean, oh my god, the amount of time that they took to kind of explain the influences of his music, whether it was like the gospel, the early days of rock and roll with like BB King and like jazz and like all those kind of influences. And then later you even get this moment. Like I also grew up being like a huge Little Richard fan. I just grew up with like a lot of Motown and stuff. So the moment where he kind of popped on the scene in, at maybe like not the halfway point, but a little bit, like Elvis was already kind of famous by that point. And you could see the influences there too. It was just like a mind blowing moment for me. I was like, oh my God, that is so cool that they were just like in this kind of, like like I said, like speakeasy kind of bar, and he's sitting down watching him do his thing too. And it was like, holy shit, this is so cool. And the music was hitting so hard. I loved it. I loved that they got into all of that.
Yeah, it was a very enjoyable movie. I want to talk about the sort of leading duo of this movie. I think this is what we're going to spend the most time talking about here today.
I think we also let's preface for the audience. I think we might have a little bit of a contrasting opinion here. We saved it for the podcast, FYI.
Yes. Let's start there. Let's start with Tom Hanks playing Colonel Tom Parker.
Yeah.
So, spoiler, you and I were texting. We did have differing opinions on this character. From what I've seen and read online and on Rotten Tomatoes and on Twitter and stuff, you are in the majority. I am in the minority. Yeah. I really liked Tom Hanks as Colonel Tom Parker. I thought he was so silly, and I really, really enjoyed it. He is a pointy nose away from being Burgess Meredith as the Penguin from the 60s Batman TV show.
That's very good.
You throw the pointy nose on him, and he is Burgess Meredith. Literally. I think
I see that.
I can see the criticism that he was like, he dialed it up to 11, as you like to say, with his performance. I can totally see that, but I just, I don't know. It worked. I thought I got such a kick out of him. Like the whole thing when Elvis is doing a special and he's just so hellbent on him singing "Here Comes Santa Claus," and he's like,
that was so funny.
And he says it like 100 times.
Yes.
About like "Here Comes Santa Claus"
and the sweater, and he just desperately wanted him to put that sweater on.
But I thought his chemistry he had with Austin Butler was really, really good. And it also worked for me. Like he was a slimy bastard. At the end when they're arguing and he's like, "I ought to shoot you in your frog face" or whatever he says. You feel that. You're like, yeah, screw this guy.
Yeah.
And I credit Tom Hanks' greasy performance for helping get that emotion over. But I understand the feeling that was a touch over the top.
Yeah, like, and listen, I want to be clear here. Again, like, I would never even begin to question somebody like Tom Hanks's choices. Like, the guy has like more than proven himself a million times over, and very rightly so. But the one thing I would say is I think a lot of people I think there was just a very different focus on certain characters, where obviously like Elvis, the bar was so high because we've all seen him, heard him speak, heard him sing, all of these different things. Like, he's iconic. We know what we want to expect from that. And yet Colonel Tom Parker was this kind of in the shadows character that everybody had kind of heard over the years, some rumblings about how Elvis was taken advantage by this Colonel Tom Parker and his manager, whatever. But nobody ever really heard him.
Yeah.
And even I was in the category of, when I watched the movie, I want to be clear, I'm not really critiquing his performance. It's more just that it was like, I don't know. I just wasn't what I was expecting. So when I did see that level of intensity at times, I was like, well, that must have been the way he was. And maybe he was, but I just kind of assumed that maybe there wasn't any footage of this Colonel Tom Parker. And maybe this was sort of like like he had talked to Priscilla or somebody who like really knew him at that time and was feeding him this information. But there actually were a couple of like video clips of him. Granted, he was much older, of like interviews and stuff. And it's just not at all the same. Like, it's very different. Like, it's just a very kind of like mellow, but again, he's so much older. Who knows? Like, he could have very much sounded like that. I don't know. But that being said, there was definitely times where I think for me, it was more just sometimes his voice. Like, did you ever see Polar Express?
Oh, yes.
And Tom Hanks does like a million of those voices. There was times where that voice sounded very similar to like one or two of the voices that he did in that. And I think it was more that because it was a cartoon. Like, I kept hearing that.
I also kept hearing there was some Woody sneaking in
a little
here
bit.
And there.
Southern a little bit. Yeah.
I think the point, because we learn about how he's sort of like a nomad. Like nobody knows who he really is and like what country he comes from. And
too. Yeah.
So I wonder if like that, I was talking about this with my partner after seeing it. I wonder if the choice to have that accent, like that's why they made that choice, because it's kind of like you're kind of listening and you're like, what accent is this? Like well, where's he from?
Exactly. And not only that, and that's why I'm saying I'm not really critiquing his performance. It's again, like it was just more like, I think some people are being a little harsh about it. I do think that it was more, again, you have to think about stylistically, like what was being asked of Tom Hanks in that movie. And I even made this point to my girl as well, that it was just kind of like when we were watching it, I kept thinking like, this could easily translate from what they did in this movie to a Broadway play.
Yeah. And
just not even just the fact that there was all that music and everything in it, but just stylistically what they chose to do with it. And even some of kind of, like we just said, like a little bit of like a dialed up performance and things like that. Like that is generally what you kind of get in a Broadway play. And I think it worked in the world that Baz Luhrmann created. And I think that's what also kind of made me go like, no, I'm enjoying this. I like it in this world.
His performance elicited emotion from me as I was watching it.
Yeah,
like,
I liked it.
Funny. Yeah. I found him funny. And then I also, like I said, that when Elvis was upset at him, I was upset at him too. I was like, yeah, you are a slimy bastard.
And that was the other thing. Like, I also, like, I feel like I've gone also down the rabbit hole since I've watched this movie. And that's a testament to the movie as well, that I was kind of like, man, I got to know more about some of these things. Like, did that all really happen? Or like, because at the end of the day, it's a Hollywood film. They're going to fudge some things here and there for pacing and things like that and whatever. But the overall relationship between Colonel Tom Parker and Elvis, and what you start to learn about what actually went on there, and how there actually was a big lawsuit later where all of this stuff came out and it exposed him for being the snake in the grass that he was, essentially. I thought it was fascinating, but while at the same time in the movie really explored the fact that, maybe Elvis wouldn't have been as big as he was without him.
Yep.
And they a lot of the dialogue elicited that sort of conversation, which is like, I'm using you, but you're using me too. And maybe he wasn't making every, right decision along the way. Like, as far as like the obvious one was the Christmas special, and they kind of went behind his back and did the other special that is now obviously infamous. But but that whole conversation was so interesting, I thought, that it really kind of exposed that, you didn't want to completely demonize this person, because he really did help expose him to the masses.
The movie basically gave him the credit for launching Elvis's acting career.
Oh, very much. Which I think, I grew up watching some of those movies as well, like some of those old Elvis movies, and it's like, why is every scene on the beach? And like, why is every scene on the beach and it's just like everything, it turns into a sing song? And I actually thought it was, I don't know. I thought that's maybe what he wanted to do in his movie career or whatever. And it turns out it really wasn't. Like, he really kind of saw himself as being like the next James Dean.
Yeah.
And that was upsetting. Like, I actually thought there was a lot of like kind of heartbreaking moments throughout the movie where you start to learn some of those things where, again, where, the overarching storyline here was betrayal in a lot of ways.
Yep.
An extremely talented human being who was, in a lot of ways, was a pioneer as far as being like that level of fame. Oh. And what can happen to you when you get that famous. I thought that that was such an interesting story to explore. And that level of portrayal, it was so interesting to me.
Before we talk about Austin Butler, last thing on Tom Hanks, what did you think of the decision to sort of tell the story through Colonel Parker's lens? Because it starts with him being like, they say I killed him, I didn't. And it's sort of like, it's as if he's narrating the story to you.
Yeah.
And they kind of fudge it, and it's like, is he a reliable narrator? Is what he's saying true?
Yeah,
I loved that. I did not think that
that's
where they were going to take this.
Me
and
too.
I really, really liked that. Was whoever came up with, whether that was Baz Luhrmann or one of the writers or whoever.
Yeah,
fantastic choice. Fantastic choice.
I absolutely agree with that. And again, like to our earlier point of biopics as a film category, I think a lot of movies get lost in just telling this kind of beat by beat by beat story of a person's life. And I'm not saying it's easy, because like, again, how do you squeeze an entire life of somebody that's so famous or whatever into a 2.5 hour movie? And that's why, like I said earlier too, like, a lot of times I generally gravitate more towards the ones where they pick a very particular moment in that career or life or whatever. But to do it this way, and really show, and that's why I was making the point too of saying like that overarching storyline really was telling the story of the betrayal that was his relationship with not only Colonel Tom Parker, but a lot of the people around him. And the the enablers and all of the things that were going on around him. And like, I mean, you saw it with the doctors and everything, like shooting him up with drugs. And again, like we all, well, not maybe to everybody, a lot of people may be learning this for the first time if you don't know a lot of things about Elvis, but yeah, they shot him up with drugs and he became an addict. And
I didn't know the ins and outs of Elvis's story. Like I didn't
know all the
main beats that everybody knows, but like, I didn't know like some of the detail that this movie went into. Which
Crazy
brings us to the leading man, Austin Butler,
absolutely,
who stars as Elvis Presley in this movie.
Yeah,
it's for me, it's interesting. There are moments. This movie to me, I'm just gonna come out and say it.
Okay,
I didn't love
That's
the
why we're
first
here.
act. I didn't love the first act of this movie. I thought it was really jumpy. I thought it was really all over the place. I had a hard time. And I think that that's because they wanted to tell the story that you were talking about earlier about the special, about all that. Like, but they had to get all this stuff in first. And it just, act one, like I said, it was really like all over the place. And like he's growing up, and then the relationship with his mother, and then he's going to war, and then he's like, and he meets Colonel Tom Parker, and he's opening for this country guy, and it's like really hard to follow. It just went really fast. That's the best way to put it. They were moving at a really fast clip.
Yeah, I agree.
And then once he came back from the war, I thought it really slowed down and settled in, and it became more of a cohesive story that flowed a lot better for me. And I think I enjoyed Austin Butler's performance more. So this is a really long-winded way of saying I think he was a victim of, for me, he was a victim of the like, I couldn't settle into him for the first part of the movie. And then once we got into sort of older, more mature Elvis, and we started getting the emotional relationship, like after his mother passed away, and when he meets Priscilla, and when he starts to become famous, and I really started connecting to him more and really enjoying his performance more.
Yeah.
Because the movie itself sort of allowed me to do that.
Yeah. And
if that
I don't know. It makes what you just said make complete sense. I think it was interesting. This was in all honesty, this was more of a secondary thought after I had a little time to like digest the movie and everything, because I'm not going to actually disagree with you. I thought that at first it seemed a little not jumpy, but it in some ways it did. Like it seemed a little like what you just said, like it was moving at a clip, and I was kind of like, oh, whoa, here we go. Okay. But I didn't really take it in as like necessarily like a bad thing, but it was more in hindsight. And to your point exactly was what I was going to say. The fact that it did seem to kind of settle down once he came back from the war, or at least being deployed and whatever. I thought it was so interesting that it did slow down there, because they made a point actually in the movie of saying, we're going to reintroduce a much more all-American Elvis, I think was the words they chose.
Yes.
And in terms of being like, a more calm, digestible Elvis, which to me almost reads like that was a filmic choice to make it like that. Again, more in hindsight. I didn't really take it in that way at first, but more in like hindsight, when I was thinking about the movie, I took it in that way of being like, oh, maybe that, I think that might have been why they were doing it, because it was supposed to be chaotic, because it was this real crazy rise to fame and all this craziness going on along the way of, you know, him getting arrested and him.
Oh my God, that was wild.
That
was wild.
concert scene. Yeah. And that was what I, again, with like the modern day music, I thought lent itself so well, was they amplified some of those moments, because I'm sure by today's standards, I don't think some of those chaotic scenes would have necessarily seemed as chaotic to a modern audience. So they like, I'm sure it was still chaotic, but they amped it up. Yeah. So like those moments with Elvis on stage, and he was like, I'm going to show you who the real Elvis is. And he like goes nuts on stage. Yeah. Like, we know he did, but was it to that degree? I don't know. Was the level of chaos of, you know, getting them in the cars and getting in the crowd, wrestling with the cops to try to get to him and everything? I don't know. It could have been, but was it to that degree, or did they amplify it a little bit to just really show that level of influence and impact that he had? But all of those things combined with the early parts of his career and the early parts of his life, where it was this kind of like, father's in jail, mother doesn't know what to do with him. They're in this like low income housing.
Him and his mother have a really like, because a fun fact that I didn't know, that he had a twin.
I actually didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that either.
So his mother develops this really like codependent, like borderline uncomfortable relationship with him.
Yes.
And
like obsessive.
Yes,
it's a nice way of putting it, I think. Yeah.
Yes. And that was sort of an interesting tidbit that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the part that went like really fast when she's like, booby.
We kept laughing about that too. Booby. Yeah. Come out here, booby. Hurry up, booby.
You gotta make sure you can't be gone more than 4 days, booby.
I don't know if I trust that Colonel Tom Parker, booby. I loved it. But the little moments like that, I thought it was interesting seeing that, because again, these are the little things that probably a wide audience doesn't know. And I think I know quite a bit about Elvis, and I didn't know that either.
And so, like, to touch on Austin Butler again, when the film settled in is when he really took off for me, and like all the best when he started sort of defying the Colonel was when I really started to enjoy him, and started with Priscilla, like, do what makes you happy, play the music that makes you happy.
Yeah.
And like you could feel the emotion, and then as he goes down the road of drugs, and wasn't a huge drinker. He drank a lot of Coke.
Yeah.
Pepsi.
But it was the drugs. Well, because he was exhausted.
Pills. Yeah. Yes.
You see him on stage. Apparently, like, even Austin Butler had a moment of exhaustion filming this movie. Yeah. Because it's like the level of intensity that he brought to all his performances. Because like he was on every night, and he had to do that level of performance, because that's what the people wanted every night. And it's you can't do that. You burn out. So what do? You start popping some uppers. And that's
he's got a doctor like shooting him up with like presumably like
whatever
adrenaline,
or whatever that is,
whatever the 70s version of adrenaline is. And he gets, and then he starts getting like paranoid, and he's got his like case of guns, and he's out in the hallway because like celebrities are getting murdered, and like Dr. King is getting murdered, and JFK, and like
Bobby Kennedy, all the all of that. I thought that was so interesting that they actually dove into that as well.
Yes.
Because again, I think it's fair to say that Elvis was, in my opinion at least, truly like the first global celebrity like that we now associate with, like, I don't know, there's so many, but like the Michael Jacksons, where it's just like
if you
so
listen
intense.
To like legendary musicians of our time, like people that we look at as legends.
Oh yeah.
They will, you all hear them say, who was one of the biggest influences on your career?
Yep.
Elvis Presley.
Right?
Like
Beatles.
he is like the OG GOAT.
Yeah.
Of like showman musician.
Absolutely. Oh, exactly. Like he was that guy. Like even people like the Beatles and the Michael Jacksons and all these kinds of guys, they all said in their career that they took influence from here, not only in musically, like the choices they made musically, but how they performed on stage. Like he truly was a pioneer. And that's why he still got the title King of Rock. But what was so interesting to me too was actually Austin Butler did an interview. I can't remember. I think it was James Corden. And he talked about how him and Paul McCartney actually rode a train together either shortly after or during the filming of Elvis. And they had a whole discussion about the time when the Beatles and Paul McCartney obviously all met Elvis and how starstruck they were.
Yeah.
And just like how like on this pedestal they had him and everything else. And I just think that that's so fascinating. That is so fascinating to know that like these, like you just said, perfectly put, like all these stars and musical geniuses that we love.
Yeah.
That's their guy.
Yeah. They're the legends of our time.
Yeah.
And he's their legend.
Yeah. That's wild. So that's what I'm saying. There have been a lot of roles to circle back to Austin Butler playing Elvis. There have been a lot of roles over the years that like there's a good chunk of weight, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be like a person of note, like an Elvis or something like that. Like there's been like the Joker obviously holds a lot of weight for a lot of people as far as performance and everything. But I think it's fair to put Elvis in a very upper echelon category of if you do it right, you're a hero. If you're even kind of wrong, you're a bum. Like you didn't do it right. You messed up. It's bad news bears. I thought Austin Butler crushed.
Yeah.
I thought
he did a really good job.
I thought he absolutely crushed. And then when you also start to hear about the amount of time and effort he put into it, and I kind of briefly touched on this, that for like 2 or 3 months, he didn't even know if he had the role. And you heard about the other people. I forget who all, I might be forgetting a couple names, but it was like, there was like 4 or 5 pretty notable actors all up for the role. It was obviously Austin Butler. Miles Teller was up. God, there was a couple. I always forget some of their names. I'm forgetting some of them. I know you're checking it out. Harry Styles, that was the other big one. Harry Styles was a big one, and he apparently desperately wanted that role. And then when Baz Luhrmann wasn't sure, because he was afraid that he was already, Harry Styles, and like he's too influential in his own right, that he thought it would take away from the story.
Ansel Elgort.
That's the other guy. Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the right choice. Like you're Austin Butler is not yet a household name.
He is now. Yeah.
Yeah, he is now.
Wild.
But it's the, you know what it is? It's the Chris Reeve Superman thing.
Yeah.
Chris Reeve was not a household name, so when you watched him, you were watching Superman. And like Elvis, Austin Butler, not yet a household name. So you're watching him and you're not, it's not taking you out of it. Like Harry Styles would have taken you out of it.
It would have taken me out of it.
Yes.
And that's no fault of his own, other than just
he's just too big of a musician. He's like the biggest pop musician in the world right now.
Oh, he's crushing. And I, in all honesty, I think we even kind of touched on that when we watched which one was it? The Eternals, and he pops out as whatever, and it was just like, oh, Harry Styles is here. And that's not his fault. That's just not his fault. It's just just the level of fame that he has on his own.
Yes.
But I think my big thing here was just knowing the pressure that he was under, and knowing like how long he had to be in that world. And he literally said in a few interviews, like, I put my life on pause.
Yeah.
Like my whole life on pause. And this movie got kind of broken up and all that because of COVID and blah, blah, blah. And he really lived with that role for such a long time. And I know a lot of people, and even like everybody's been having a bit of a chuckle. I think even Austin Butler's been having a bit of a chuckle about it.
I was going to say, I mean, he got a new voice.
But the thing is if you actually listen to like some of these actors who have ever done like a real deep method role where they were just like in it all the time, it takes them a long time to wind down. And I actually think over even this course of the press junkets and everything, you're starting to see it dissipate a little bit. And it's like, wow, that's how deep he was in it. And exactly. And that's what I'm saying. I'm like, there's obviously a level of comedy to it. And I think he's been open and like kind of having some fun with it as well. And, you know, he still had like a little bit of like that Southern twang in his voice where he grew up in California. But but that also tells you his level of commitment. If nothing else, if you want to like laugh about it, also look at the fact that it's like, that's how committed this kid was.
Yeah.
This kid was like unbelievably committed. And also to the point of saying, and this is again, no slight against any, you know, other actor who's done a biopic, especially a singer who didn't actually end up singing the music. But my God, he was incredible.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
His voice was like, I feel like I very rarely use the word perfect.
Yeah.
Because I just think I want to save that for the moments where I think it actually is perfect. I thought his voice was actually perfect in this, as not only speaking Elvis, but singing Elvis was just like off the charts. There were times where I was like, there's no way that's him singing. And it was him. And it's like unbelievably spot on.
Speaking of like biopics, like this is another conversation for another time.
Okay.
And I don't want to like, I'm with you. I don't want to dump on anybody here.
Yeah.
But I think everyone, I know I am. Yeah. I'm kind of looking back after watching what Taron Egerton did in Rocket Man and what Austin Butler did in this movie. I'm kind of looking back at that Oscar Rami one and was like, you gave a really great performance.
And that's the thing. I don't feel like I have to hold it. I don't think they're, sorry, continue, but I don't think they're beholden to each other, but it's just,
I just think it's another level.
Correct.
To sing the songs of these legendary artists.
Exactly.
Like those two guys who I just mentioned did. Yeah. And Rami didn't. And that's not Rami's fault. They clearly decided like, hey, this is the type of movie we're going to shoot.
And you add so much value over here that it's like, you forget it. Like, we're just going to, we'll do that.
It does. I do though, personally now, when I see that, I kind of go like, like the Academy didn't want to give Taron an Oscar because it was a biopic role for the second year in a row, but he actually sang the music. And I really hope that Austin Butler doesn't get that treatment again coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Like, because
he better deserves, at minimum get a
he nod. He deserves a nomination.
He's definitely going to.
For sure.
He's definitely going to.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you for correcting me earlier, by the way. I said JFK, and you're right. It was Bobby Kennedy. Some U.S. historian is going to be watching this and being like, look at this, look at this Canadian.
Being sick to his stomach. No, well, technically all that was kind of happening while Elvis was around. They actually didn't get into that, though. It was they focused on Bobby Kennedy and
Martin Luther King.
But I was just going to say quick, too, that the thing that I think is so interesting also about the casting in general, just before we get totally off topic, because I think this is fully in the vein. I do even remember there being a conversation with, I think, all of the directors who have ever done a movie with an actor playing such an iconic person, like whether it was Jamie Foxx playing Ray Charles or the other ones we just mentioned. There's kind of almost like a rule, which is, do I cast a singer and teach him how to act? Or do I cast an actor and teach him how to sing?
I always say go with the latter.
Me too. And so my thing was, think about the lightning in a bottle moment of casting him. And that was also what was funny too, when you found out about this process of 2-3 months of not knowing if he's going to get cast. According to, I think, even Baz Luhrmann, he was like, it was pretty much always going to be him, but we needed to like cover our bases and whatever. But the lightning in the bottle moment to not only get somebody that doesn't look exactly like Elvis, but they found his angles at times. Boy. Yeah. And sometimes in that movie, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
He looked exactly like him. And then
you know what he looked the most like him? When he got older,
the special.
Yes.
Yes,
When he got older,
I fully agree.
When he was younger, it didn't. Because you just mentioned Miles Teller, and I kind of was sitting here thinking, like, I could totally see Miles Teller.
Miles
as like
has that
kind
of like boxier face like Elvis had, and Austin's a little thinner, kind of like a little more like my shape face. Whereas like Miles has like a little bit more box. So looks wise, Miles would pull it off.
Props to the costume and makeup team in this movie, because as he got older, he looked as he got older and a little heavier, he looked more like Elvis did at that time in his life than he did as young Elvis.
Yeah. Yes. And honestly, that was something I genuinely was concerned about, was the aging process for him, because Austin Butler does have has a baby face, and I think that's most apparent when he's playing young Elvis. And then you're kind of like, man, like obviously Elvis wasn't that old when he actually died. Like he was, I think, early 40s or mid 40s. But the fact that they were able to do it so gracefully, and not make it seem like, oh, that's now Austin Butler in a fat suit, or Austin Butler with a couple extra wrinkles and mutton chops. Like it just, I actually thought, like to your point, like all the credit in the world to the costume and makeup department, or hair and makeup department. Like, my God, I thought that they absolutely rocked it. And I'll say this too, especially as there was, and I think I said this to you even before we started the podcast, because we were starting to chit chat even before this happened. And we're always, that's a running joke for listeners, we're always kind of like, save it.
Yeah.
And there was one thing that did actually pop in my head when I was watching the movie, and it's near the end, and you see him obviously very overweight and everything else. And I remember seeing it, and I was kind of like, oh no, maybe this is the first miss of the movie as far as like aging him up and putting him in the fat suit or whatever, and thinking like, oh man, I don't think he looked like that. And they transitioned into the actual clip of that exact performance at that exact angle, and I didn't even notice. I didn't even notice. I was watching it.
I had the moment where I was like, oh shit, that's him. That's the real him.
Yeah, like it just switched over, and I was like, holy crap. Yeah. That's actually what he looked like. And it was, again, they were so strategic with finding the angles and everything. And again, we always make this joke in this podcast too, that it's like, somehow it always circles back to Batman. But in the Batman movie as well, they talked a lot about the Batman suit and looking maybe almost like silly.
If you move the camera even slightly this way, or if the lighting is slightly off, it looks stupid.
But in the right angle and in the right light, it was perfect. So knowing all that, and knowing how young Austin Butler looks in like his real life, knowing that they were able to find those angles where he truly looked like Elvis, and just all of the stuff, like I just thought, like, wow, they really, this was a project of love. I thought, I thought it was just brilliant.
Before we get out of here, I would be remiss not to mention that, Stranger Things dropping this Friday, and there's Dacre Montgomery in this movie.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Is
Billy.
Billy playing Steve Binder, one of the producers of the infamous Elvis special. He showed up, and I was like, oh my God, there's Billy.
Yeah. I loved all that too. But I could keep talking about this movie all day, but I loved hearing all that stuff too, about like how, because again, that's Elvis special is so famous for relighting that fire and letting people, reintroducing the world to Elvis and what he always truly was in his heart of hearts, and how they tried to like dumb him down for people, or if you want to call it that. But the knowing that was supposed to be a Christmas special, and they essentially kind of like
hijacked
it and did all this crazy stuff without Colonel Tom Parker knowing, without the producers. I think they said it was Singer, which was like the sewing machine. Singer Sewing Machines, I guess, was producing it.
And they were all there to watch him in
a sweater and sing "Here Comes Santa Claus."
Here comes Santa Claus.
I thought all that was so cool. Yeah, I didn't. That was another thing I did not know anything about, and I thought that whole sequence of events, I thought the stakes were so high Just as a viewer watching, I was like, holy shit, this is so intense.
Yeah.
I thought they did a brilliant job of portraying that moment and the intensity of like how that affected his whole life from that point on. I thought that was great.
All right, Brad, now's the time. We need your letter grade for Elvis. I'm going to go with B+.
Okay.
Really liked it. Really enjoyed it. First act was a little too fast and too jumpy for me. I love Baz Luhrmann's style in some parts. It drives me nuts in other parts. And great performances all around. Kind of long. Like it was long. Like this movie was pushing 3 hours.
You can expect that from a biopic, though.
Yes. Yeah. So like B+ to an A-. That's what I'm gonna give it.
Okay. I'm going solid A.
Okay.
Just a solid A. My thing, just to kind of full circle this whole thing of what we're discussing, which is like the Baz Luhrmann style. I think the performances quite honestly speak for themselves. Like I'm glad we talked about them, but I think it's so obvious at this point how great they were.
Yes.
The thing for me with this too was it was just like a sensory explosion, especially for a lot of those
100%.
A lot of those concert scenes, and really trying to evoke the emotion and the intensity of kind of like nobody had seen this before. And so trying to again show that to a modern audience and not have it come off as like, well, you know, I could go on YouTube and watch that and it would have the same impact. To kind of have it be like that flash, snappy, and like have these kind of intercutting scenes and like this kind of really intense color palette and imagery kind of flying at you at all times.
Oh yeah.
Even moments where they had like graphics up on the screen of like, I can't in my mind right now remember what they were.
If you want to cop a little buzz and then go watch this, I think
that was the first thing
yeah.
If anything, I was thinking that while we were in the theater,
this is trippy.
Damn, we probably should have maybe smoked a little weed before we came here.
Because Baz Luhrmann,
if it's legal where you live.
Yes. Baz Luhrmann doesn't just like go to the next scene. He like spins into the next scene.
Yeah.
And Elvis doesn't just go to Vegas. Giant Las Vegas font comes across the screen. It's like, it's just like over the top. And like I said, for me, it works in some parts, and then in other parts, it's just like slow down, Baz, slow down.
Yeah. And again, for me, from all these things coming in and knowing that again, it was like a start to finish life and career biopic. This is probably my favorite biopic that I've seen.
Yep.
In that, because if we're gonna get like category, excuse me, of you know biopics and things like that, again, like a start to finish life and career. I think this was the best. I think of that category because I just thought that it kept it so interesting and stylized and all those things to portray all those moments and interest and impact on the world and everything else. I thought solid A, and I would be absolutely mind blown if a lot of actors are not nominated, if a lot of categories are not nominated, if you know, Baz Luhrmann doesn't get the Oscar nod as well as the picture itself. So I'm really, really stoked that this was also landed in like a summer blockbuster moment. Because I think it would have been really easy to save a movie like this for potential like award season and things like that. And it's like, let's get back to just putting out movies like this. Like, again, now we've had back-to-back movies with Top Gun Maverick and Elvis, where we've kind of gotten back into this grandiose scale practical filmmaking, high stakes, high budget, big actors, good acting.
Word, grandiose. Again, we got to get out of here, so I don't want to go off topic, but we talked a shitload on this podcast about movie theaters and where they're going, and it's very clear the appetite is still there for big blockbusters.
Yep.
I don't know if it's still going to be there for your rom-com. I don't know if it's still going to be there for some of these other movies.
Yep.
But if you're making like a big scale blockbuster,
an event,
yes, people will show up for sure.
If you build it, they will come.
Yes. Okay, Brad, we've got, as I mentioned earlier, we've got the part 2 of Stranger Things on the horizon, and then we have Thor: Love and Thunder hitting theaters next weekend, so we will be back to discuss both of those.
Yes, sir.
Thor: Love and Thunder getting some really good, like, early reviews. Really good. Yes. My man,
I don't
Christian Bale getting the thumbs up. Yeah.
Not only that, our boy Chris was putting out a statement the other day of like what a joy it's been, and I was like, oh no, what does that mean?
Well, no, I saw a quote that said, I'm gonna keep coming back until they tell me to leave.
I know, but it was
that
just
might
like
be a misdirect.
It might be a misdirect. I know. That's why I read it. I'm like, this could mean one of two things.
Yes.
Oh, I don't know.
Yes,
I don't know.
yes.
I'm very excited to watch it. Again, this is just going to be another huge weekend. And also, side note, to all our Canadian viewers, happy Canada Day coming up.
Yes, happy Canada
Day. Our American listeners, happy Independence Day. Happy 4th.
Yep.
We'll see you next week.
We're out of here, guys. Hit that like and subscribe button below if you like what you see. Also, like, leave a comment. We love the comments. Keep them coming. Thanks again to all the new subs.
Love talking to you guys.
Yeah.
We love talking to you. Come talk to us.
We'll see you guys next time.
Bye, everybody.